The internet introduced one of culture's most interesting paradoxes.
What are you going on about?
Well, think about it. We have all this information at our fingertips, yet arguably we're not always smarter for it.
You know, I've noticed that. People are quick to share and retweet things nowadays based on a headline. It's kind of sad.
There's this false sense of security that we're actually becoming more educated through things we see through the feed or what our friends or followers are saying. But 10 minutes of real life conversation or a real life experience, I think trumps all of that, everything that happens digitally. It's not always possible to engage in something in an experience. When you do understand it, it changes the game. Very early on in my publishing career, a lot of the content we created actually lived through just images, stuff that we had seen or we had found online.
Oh yeah, what was it like covering street culture from Hong Kong?
A lot of the content we created was based off of photos, and really there wasn't a lot of background information. It was really along the lines of just describing what it looked like, what brand it was, etc. And it was very superficial. There wasn't a lot of fact-checking or objectivity behind the information.
So do you think there's any value in this half-assed reporting?
Looking back, I definitely think there was value because a lot of the stuff we talked about was so niche, and you were basically putting it out in the world for people as an introduction to what was essentially a subculture at the time. But even if you wanted to dive deeper though, what was lacking was, a deeper narrative, more information. That stuff was really hard to come by. And a lot of that information seemed to only remain with people that were creating the product or the pioneers of the culture.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Another thing about the internet is that when it comes to sharing, it's often based on things you're interested in, what you think is important. And the problem with that is when you have a question, sometimes it's difficult to find an answer, especially if nobody's really thought about things in that way. Say, for example, I wanted to know more about a famous person and what inspires them.
I suspect that's why I think Quora and Reddit are so popular these days. You're essentially controlling the narrative on educating yourself. It's gathering knowledge in your own terms, really.
Definitely. And going back to your earlier point about the power of physical experience and interaction, when did you realize that these things are so important?
One moment that really struck a chord was very early on in my career as an editor, and I was assigned to a trade show in Las Vegas called Magic. For those that are unfamiliar, Magic is this trade show that delves into the world of streetwear, and basically people go there to place orders for next season's deliveries. And aside from that, there's also a lot of parties and a lot of debauchery that goes down.
All right, what are we talking about here? The usual Vegas experience?
No strippers for me, but a lot of it came down to, hanging out with new friends. I remember one night we were at a friend's condo from the now defunct label Homeroom. For whatever reason, we had taken a microwave and turned it into an ice bucket. By the end of that night, I was drinking Jägermeister out of my own shoe. And I was also hanging out with Neek back in the day before he became this supercar driving, astute businessman. The actual trade show experience, though, for us, it wasn't that great, to be honest. We were ill-prepared. We had some stock signage. We had 2 desks that we had borrowed from the venue. And basically, it was my coworker and I just sitting there blogging. We didn't really have a purpose. People were coming up asking, what are you guys doing here? Working and publishing from a trade show floor, to be honest, is really awkward. But one of the biggest takeaways, the impact of just interacting with people face to face in light of a community. Despite having sent over 100 emails to somebody and thinking I was connected to them, 10 minutes of face-to-face time really changed my perspective.
That's interesting. So would you say this single trade show experience changed your perception on things?
Online, you're still interacting with people as humans, but there's so much physical experience that's lost in that. In conversation, there are these subtle nuances. It's the ability to ask a question on the fly. It's about someone's body language. And all this creates a deeper connection with somebody. It's like more profound.
Okay, that sounds great and all, but it doesn't sound all that revelational. I mean, trade shows have been around for ages across all industries.
I understand in this modern era, some communities are inherently digital. But I don't know if these digital first generations really understand the impact of just meeting up face to face.
Yeah, I think people have lost sight of how important physical interaction is. As humans, we're hardwired for this face-to-face contact. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the effects of this digital-first culture on the next generation. And that's a big unknown right now.
I'm sure the studies will continue to come out. Anecdotally, I can see the people around me changing, and I also feel myself changing at times.
Actually, I was reading this study from Fairfield University in 2014. And basically, it concluded that taking digital photos, it never quite registers in your memory. But If you actively engage with the photo, so say you're pinching to zoom, you're more likely to remember the whole experience.
That totally makes sense. I mean, having more physical touch points allows something to register on a deeper level, right? It makes me think of shooting film back in the day. It's the sound of the shutter, the vibrations of winding the camera, the smell of the chemicals.
And I'd go as far as arguing that this lack of physical interaction, it prevents a sense of deeper connection and empathy, which sort of leads to my next point about ComplexCon and how physical interaction is something that really plays into exactly what it's all about and kind of why it makes sense for MAEKAN.
What are your thoughts on how this will all play out? And actually, maybe to take a step back, for those unfamiliar, what is ComplexCon?
So ComplexCon is this consumer-facing trade show. It integrates things like music, fashion, art, food, and tech, categories that readers of Complex are familiar with. And you've also got these smaller events such as audience panels. By the way, I'm really looking forward to that. Retail experiences, concerts, and food. So it really plays in the vein of things like Comic-Con, K-Con, where fans have direct access to their favorite brands, personalities, and of course you've got that added retail component. It's going to be a great chance for us to actually connect with people, see their genuine reactions to our stories, stuff that we've been working on for the past few months. And hopefully it will put people onto something a bit more unexpected. I mean, that's the whole point. And from the perspective of community, which is really important to MAEKAN, interacting with people face-to-face is going to be key.
I'm indifferent about the retail component, to be honest. But the panels, to me, are what are very fascinating, as you mentioned. They're highlighting some interesting topics, including the one with, I believe it was Jesse Williams and Mark Echo. They're going to talk about the current state of education in America. Everywhere around the world, it's something we're always thinking about, but bringing it to ComplexCon, where the demographic is a bit younger, it puts something a little bit more serious in front of them and lets them understand what are the ramifications and what are the things they need to worry about. But back to that sort of retail component, relative to Magic in the past, which, just to kind of refresh your memory, it was more of sort of a B2B where brands would sell to stores essentially. And that wholesale model, as we know it, is changing rapidly. ComplexCon sort of flips the script. Consumers are allowed in and they're able to interact with these brands on a much more profound level and connect with them in ways that arguably weren't always available to them in the past. And I think this ComplexCon moves kind of addresses what brands need to do going forward to really resonate with their crowd and with their shoppers.
Do you mean a great emphasis on direct-to-consumer?
Yeah, it's definitely something that takes into consideration both the business side with the margins, but also the marketing side with a closer sort of dialogue with people that are interested in their product. The brands are now controlling the whole experience. It's not just, left in the hands of someone at a store selling a product they may not fully understand. They're controlling online and offline communications.
Yeah, remember that guy we met recently? He was head of retail for a respected and popular independent eyewear company. He told us about how strategically they're starting to cut wholesale accounts and transition more into a retail brand, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. If you're an expensive eyewear company or you're selling t-shirts and you're one brand of 10 on the rack, I think it's really important for you to get involved and find a way to really speak to people that have taken an interest in your product. But it's really a layered issue to unpack. The time is right though. This and future generations seem very much in tune with the idea of experience. So how can you create great experiences for them? I remember reading this Harris Group survey that said something like 72% of consumers are looking to spend more money on experiences than they are on material goods. And what's interesting about that is you now have these brands popping up that aren't even out to necessarily sell you something. They want to sell you the experience first, and hopefully that'll translate into sales of product. Not to contradict myself, but my previous point was about educational and community experiences versus the more leisurely ones a lot of people are engaging in. People seem to be hell-bent on spending a few $100s to take in an experience like a concert only to really utilize that moment to share it on social media.
I do think from a fashion perspective, social media offers a great way for brands to engage with their fans. What's sad is the modern celebrity influence has almost pushed people to mimic style more than their favorite brands.
That's a good point. I just think brands need to be more savvy. They need to utilize personal relationships and just the fact of being human as tools to market themselves and to speak to people.
So is that why this was a big factor for MAEKAN participating at ComplexCon?
For sure. I think MAEKAN needs to be very deliberate in how we communicate with people, whether it's existing interests or people that just stumble upon us.
Yeah, in this day and age, you need to be willing to go where others won't, especially to stand out. And it's funny because I remember you were a bit apprehensive going into this whole thing.
ComplexCon is really just a great opportunity for us to put ourselves in front of a new audience. and hopefully people that are looking for a deeper and more profound approach to storytelling and creativity.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing our booth in person. And what we've done is, we brought a few of our favorite online stories offline. So we've got tactile, audio, visual, and hopefully a scent-based component to the whole thing. So it's going to be pretty multi-sensory. And for a first activation, I think it's a great start. Tell me a bit more about the print giveaway.
It's a hyper-focus on community. We want something where there's an understanding that for something to be healthy, it's based on contribution as well. So in this case, it means asking people for their favorite photos and moments, printing them out, and having them pin it on our community wall with a message. And in return, MAEKAN will show appreciation by giving them an art print from a story.
So it's pretty much give a print and take a print.
Precisely. We're excited to take this offline and hopefully see you guys there.